back. While the Madlanga Commission is on a short adjournment, State Advocate at IDEC, Drushanta Ramsamy, is still on the stand. Let's take you now to Pretoria, where my colleague Thembekile Mrototo as well as Canny Maphanga are standing by. Thembekile, of course, some dramatic testimony from the witness currently hearing, in fact, that Advocate Johnson may have lied to the Commission when she said that she was not central to some of those cases, the crime intelligence cases particularly, and of course that phone call that was played out at the Commission. Give us a sense then of what you've been hearing so far.
Well, Nachi, good afternoon. You know, there are witnesses who come to the Commission reluctantly. There are those who have to be pushed to concede. Today's witness, Ms. Ramsamy, well, she came ready to talk. Right out the gate, she made it clear that she viewed her now former boss, the former head of IDEC, Andrea Johnson, as someone who had basically lied in her evidence here at the Commission, especially in relation to that Section 27 affidavit that we've been talking about that related to what then became the arrests of people, including Dineo Mukwele, Dumisani Kumalo from Crime Intelligence. And in the last while, she has been asked about processes, procedure within IDEC that should have guided and governed various investigations. And she said, well, what processes really in terms of what was going on? And while we wait for the Commission to resume, I'm going to bring in our colleague, SABC News reporter Canny Maphanga, who's with me here in Pretoria. And Canny, as I was saying, I mean, this is a witness who made it very clear that she is not a big fan, or at least the work ethic of her former boss, Andrea Johnson. She also doesn't believe that she's an honest person in terms of everything that Johnson has said to the Commission, so much so that the advocate now has to come back. Possibly.
Good afternoon to you and to the viewers. Essentially, we've seen Ms. Ramsamy come armed with receipts about the kind of role that Advocate Andrea Johnson played in the investigations into crime intelligence, particularly this Mukwele matter and the Medicare 24/4 case. We later hear that she gets removed from the Mukwele matter, possibly because of the concerns that she was flagging. But at all material times, Advocate Andrea Johnson was made aware of the fact that there was no grounds to substantiate the Section 27 referral. And you see in the email chain that at the very least she is the one who in the email chain is getting all of the requested documents or whatever is being asked to be supplied to her. And the two, that is Rapesu and Ramsamy, are always careful to phrase it as here is this as requested as per your instruction. And that's a good way to keep a record of the events, because it shows that at all times she was issuing out those instructions, that she was not getting briefings as she contended in her evidence in chief when she came before the Commission. At all times she was aware, and there was a rush to constantly nab these generals. You see even with the last message about Lushaba and how she wanted information on his bank accounts because she had allegedly received information that money was going to be moved. And that is the kind of alleged abuse of power, because this particular unit enjoys so much powers in that they can investigate and prosecute and hide under Section 2813 in order to launch what would be an investigation. They're able to do things that go far beyond their scope and their mandate. And this is what she's trying to flag in her evidence and state that Johnson, together with Paramore, allegedly would do this often, even when they were being told that there is nothing to authorize on with respect to that Section 27 referral, and they shouldn't go forward until they get substantive grounds as to what is behind the complaint. But it seems that by any means necessary, Johnson wanted this matter to be authorized. And the question is, where was that alleged hidden hand? We know the evidence, how it's led up so far, who she's alleged to be in close proximity with, and what could possibly inform the interest in crime intelligence. But now we know through the actual record that is placed up or flighted up by Ramsamy that she was actually the driving force, the quote-unquote dictator behind these matters. So she can no longer divorce herself from that, because it's not just an opinion being stated by Ramsamy. She's shown a chain of emails as well as WhatsApps to show, and including recordings, that at all times Johnson was the person instructing all of these persons to do what they were doing, and the only other person left to answer to this kind of manner of approach is Mr. Peramo. But at the very least, the dots are starting to connect on Johnson, and she's likely going to have to respond to these allegations and possibly be called back to be tested on whatever she states with respect to these allegations.
And what's interesting, perhaps troubling, about the Section 27 statement affidavit on which the crime intelligence investigation was based is that now you've got a member of IDEC who was involved in the investigation who says, in fact, what was put up at the commission or as that statement is not the initial one that she became aware of at the birth of that investigation.
Absolutely. When she testifies about how she gets to know of the Section 27 referral affidavit, how it was bought in a bag, she was instructed not to make copies, to return it as soon as she had done the necessary work in a week. She states that that particular original affidavit featured prominently the Political Killings Task Team. So we know at the very least that that was the real issue in that particular probe, or that was what was allegedly being targeted. However, what was flighted before the commission had nothing to do with that particular issue, which raises questions surrounding not only how did they take this matter forward if we now learn through Ramsamy that that original affidavit went missing and they didn't have it during that period that they proceeded on the matter. Then how did they get the authorization if they didn't have that referral? And two, did they deliberately mislead the courts allegedly and the commission by bringing this particular Section 27 referral affidavit, which seemingly explains all the discrepancies and why they were struggling to marry it with the authorization, because nothing that was listed in the grounds matched the charges that they had formulated and what they were seeking to authorize in the investigation. So certainly a lot more to answer, and we understand that certain, or rather a lot of key role players in this particular matter are going to respond or rather flag these issues before the commission. That includes Mr. Rapesu, who was an investigator that was also careful to also flag that they couldn't go forward with this claim that hadn't been substantiated, but Johnson wanted to continue as per whatever targets that they were seeking to do. And it's Ramsamy's contention or allegation that this was all part of an alleged orchestrated attack on specific generals, namely Lieutenant General Dumsani Khumalo and General Fani Masemola.
Let's talk about the recording then. I think 10 minutes or so, a call that Ramsamy recorded as recently as this week, in fact, when she received a phone call from her former boss, Advocate Johnson, and in that phone call, we learned quite a few things, among them what Andrea Johnson thought of the commission and the commissioners.
At that time, she had called because she was in the middle of the testimony where she was facing tough questions about the list of suspects that they had formulated that weren't actually in the Section 27 referral affidavit. How did you get these names? Because Fadio Adams doesn't mention them in his statement. So she had to come up with an explanation to that fact. Ramsamy tells her in the call that she wrote it on a piece of paper and gave it to me. And she doesn't dispute that in the call. She just tries to figure out where she got the list from. She now turned to Dylan Peramo. So it's quite obvious that at all times Johnson was allegedly quite intimately involved and led and supervised and quote-unquote dictated, as Ramsamy says, this particular investigation. It wasn't something that she was getting briefings on or she was far removed from. She even goes on further to lament, I guess, the schooling she got on the Law 101 and how the judges sometimes speak to one another or giggle with one another. She even phrases it as quote-unquote unprofessional. She even advises, I think, at some point that if they call you, you should just leave the country. And she sounded quite panicked in that call when she was trying to get that information as requested by the commission. But that was the kind of state of mind she was in following the tough questions before this commission. And you saw that clearly she was not expecting that clinical approach by the commission, where she even complained about them going word for word, analyzing everything in every single detail, and that's part of the fact-finding mission. But Ramsamy chose to record that call because she was hearing information through the commission where she states that were complete untruths about her role in the investigation that sought to shift responsibility to her and distance Johnson, when in fact her evidence is that at all times Johnson was the quote-unquote lead or dictator on this specific project diversion, as they called it.
Canny and I are going to keep going, and and I'll tell you why. That's because Ms. Ramsamy from IDEC is now back in her seat here at the Commission, which indicates that we're about to resume. I'm looking at the evidence leader, Advocate Sigels Ncube, also going back to her seat. So it looks like we're in this one for the long haul in terms of hours. We're likely to go beyond 4 o'clock, possibly. Do not quote me on that, but it appears that we may want to finish, or the Commission may want to finish with this witness today, if possible, because there is a colleague of hers who is coming to the Commission as well, and the expectation, Canny, is that he's going to corroborate her version.
Yes, Rapesu would have been the second person who was introduced to us last week. He's the actual IDAC investigator, and he is the one that actually confirmed that there was no way, or it wasn't probable, that a statement would have been done, a second statement would have been done in Cape Town. So we'll hear from that when that evidence begins.